Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. We have Pennsylvania's Attorney General Josh Shapiro. We're going to talk about some of the important lawsuits he has filed. But first, we have a consumer update, robocalls and scams with Brian Roche, WGAL anchor and consumer investigator. Back in a moment.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, Brian, thanks for coming on the program. I wanted to get you on for not weeks, but some months again, because I'm telling you, two important subjects, robocalls, and we want to talk about an important scam, the Social Security scam. But let me start out by saying that about a week or so ago, I got 17 phone calls in one day from my own phone number with somebody trying to sell me something from Microsoft. 17 in one day.
You're not just a popular guy. You are the average American right now. The average American is getting about 15 of these per day. I know you're a numbers guy. I came with some numbers for you, so let me hit you with a few. The average American gets about 15.9 calls per day. During the month of March, there were 5.2 billion robocalls placed in the United States of America. That's 2 calls per second. Terry. 2 calls per second and about 7 million per hour. This is an epidemic in the United States of America. There's no way to sugarcoat this. The problem is getting worse. If we look at the stats for the last year, every month they continue to go up because the people making these calls have got technology that you and I cannot even wrap our heads around.
Now, I of course called you when this happened. He's my guy, so I called him and I had to find out what was going on, why I was getting all these. And you say that it's the technology, and many of these calls don't even emanate from the United States, right?
They don't emanate from the United States, and they're not telephone calls. They are calls made over the internet using a computer. These scammers get an elaborate network of computers. They program the computer to make calls. They say they pick out one area code a day, 717, and they tell the computer, call every potential numerical equation of a telephone number that could exist in that area code, and just bombard the phone calls. They sit there, they program it, they push a button, and they sit back. And the computer makes the calls. They bounce through internet servers all over the globe, sometimes 5, 6, 7 internet servers before they reach your telephone.
So any calls don't matter. You were just heading there. I know right where you were heading.
You can't find them because these calls bounce through all of these servers, and if law enforcement goes looking for them, they're looking for a needle under a haystack at the bottom of one of the oceans on the planet. It's almost impossible to find them.
But what about on these? We're getting them on these as well.
It's got a telephone number. It doesn't matter. People think that because I have a cell phone and because I signed up for the do not call list, I'm not going to get these calls. Again, it's a computer calling you. It's not a person. And you try to reason with a computer, you try to reason with a machine, it just doesn't happen.
So long run, is there any solution to this?
Well, the Federal Communications Commission is pushing a bit of a solution. For the longest time, the telephone companies in the United States would say, look, there's this bizarre law that was passed in 1934. Back in the 30s, I should say, and it doesn't allow us to limit phone calls. So a few years ago, the FCC said, look, we're not going to enforce that law. We're going to look the other way. You need to do something to protect consumers. So the FCC is pushing people, but no legislation has been passed so far.
Now I'm stunned that we wouldn't get legislation on this, given the outrage over these calls.
Look, I'm not a political animal, but I'll tell you what, from a consumer protection standpoint, this is a slam dunk. Pass this law, pass a law, do anything to tell the telephone companies, they have the technology. You can limit these calls. And there are things out there that consumers can do, but the telephone companies themselves can and should be doing a little bit more to limit these things.
All right, we're going to run to a break. Something I didn't hear of, Social Security scam. We were talking about this, and maybe the lottery. Here we go. We'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
I'm talking with Brian Roche. He's the anchor and consumer investigator at WGAL TV. All right, here's something, social security scam?
You want to scare the life out of somebody? Call them up and tell them that they're in trouble with the federal government. Call a law-abiding citizen and tell them that they're in trouble with the federal government. Even worse, tell them that their Social Security benefits and their Social Security number have been involved in a fraud. I had a woman yesterday call me. Got this phone call telling her that she was involved in Social Security fraud. Her number was involved in a case. It was connected to drug cases. Terry, she was crying, bawling on the telephone.
Oh, I can understand. I mean, this is the lifeblood for people.
It absolutely is. It's the check that people wait for every month.
Yeah.
This scam really started about this time last year. It's probably less than a year old, and we've morphed from the IRS is after you to your Social Security number is being threatened, and you're involved in law enforcement activity. And what they're ultimately—
So what do they get? What do
they're
they
after
want?
your Social Security number. They want you to confirm, listen, this is the number I have. Is that your Social Security number? And people say, oh, no, that's not my number. This is my number. And they reveal their Social Security number.
And so then they can get your check that way.
They can get everything. Once I have your Social Security number, I own you. I can get loans in your name. I could buy a car. I can buy a house. I can get credit cards. I can change your benefits that you get. I can get into your insurance policies. The Social Security number is your key to life.
But isn't the key, don't respond to anything over the phone?
It is the key, but when someone's calling you and threatening you and scaring you, I mean, picture a little 75-year-old woman who's been a law-abiding citizen her entire life, and she gets this phone call from someone claiming to be with the federal government. Then you have the woman who called me yesterday who was crying on the phone. They don't know how to deal with this because they're law-abiding citizens. They've lived.
All right, tell them what
life.
they should do. You help everybody out.
Laugh at the caller. Ignore them. Tell them that there's no way that this could happen. Your Social Security number, first of all, can never be changed. It can never be suspended. If you really did have a problem with the Social Security number, they would send you a letter and ask you to contact your local Social Security office. Come in there. Exactly.
So you go into the office and deal with it.
Exactly. Not over the telephone.
Great advice. All right, lottery scam.
Oh, well, the lottery scam is older than dirt. I think it was invented back in the prehistoric times, but this continues to proliferate. It's out there every day, either an email or a letter or a phone call telling you that you've won the lottery. Send me money, send me a fee.
Oh, my.
And people, again, older folks think, this is my chance. My ship has come in. I'm going to pay the money. And they send it away via an electronic transfer, a wire transfer, or some kind of cash card. So that's the key there. If someone you don't know is asking you to send money to a place you've never heard of via electronic transfer, that's a scam.
But I mean, you would think that people would have I get it. You're excited. You just won $50,000 and send us, a couple, who knows.
Scams work for two reasons. They either scare you into paying money, or they make you very, very happy to send money. It's one emotional extreme or the other.
Well, look, I want to thanks for coming on. This has been a great update. All right, coming up, the Attorney General of the state of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro. Boy, do we have a couple of important subjects to talk with him about, and we'll do that talking about money after we pay some bills.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Well, I'm delighted to have as my special guest the Attorney General of the state of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro. And General Shapiro, delighted to have you on. You've been on a number of times before. All right, let's start with the big news in some respects in terms of what your office has done, what you have done, has been the clergy sexual abuse. And it seems to continue to have a life in some respects of its own. The situation out in Cambria County where a local pediatrician, multiple victims of sexual abuse, and you've been heavily involved in that. But before we go into that, the clergy abuse, tell our viewers, where does all that stand?
Well, look, where it stands is since we released our report in August of last year, 16 state attorneys general have followed suit and opened investigations. The feds have launched a probe. In fact, I talked just a couple weeks ago with Attorney General Barr about the federal probe. You are seeing more and more law enforcement follow the lead of Pennsylvania. But Terry, what I think is the broader story here in the wake of our grand jury report is the reckoning that is going on in this country, from Hollywood to Penn State to the Catholic Church to other institutions. We're making it clear in our office that we will listen to survivors, and survivors are bravely coming forward and sharing their truth. And you know, we have a saying in our office: we put people before powerful institutions. And I think for so long, survivors have been silenced because their abuse came at the hands, yes, of an individual, but an individual who is being protected by a powerful institution.
Yeah, you make a great point about these institutions in many respects covering up. Now the Pope has come out, you know, and there seems to be some change. And you only got to, I mean, it involved the 6 Catholic dioceses, but I think you're right. Who knows if it goes on to other social institutions that you know, around which there's not, you know.
Right. I mean, Terry, you raised the issue of Dr. Barto, a doctor from the Johnstown area here in Pennsylvania. In some respects, it's the same storyline. This is a doctor who, you know, his patients, children, came forward and shared their truth 2 decades ago. And you know what happened in that case? He was the big doctor in the community. He was on the school board. He was a leader of his church. And the community rallied around him instead of listening.
Despite the fact that there were victims that were,
they didn't,
and in some respects, brutalized.
Right, they didn't listen to these survivors. And then fast forward to 2017, we're in office. One of those survivors comes and shares their truth with us. We go forward with an investigation. We arrest him. You know what happened, Terry? The day I announced those charges, people in the community set up a Facebook page, not to stand with the survivors, but to stand with the doctor. Now, as time went on and we made it clear that he abused dozens of his patients and family members and others. And,
is there a changing environment now with the people?
I think so. And by the way, I should say that doctor is going to jail for 158 years.
I don't think
so
he'll be.
He's going to die in
prison. Is that another way of saying life?
He'll be there forever. I do think that there is a shift in people's attitudes. And I think when they see law enforcement being willing to listen to survivors, being willing to you know, investigate what victims say, then I think a change will come. And folks trust us. You know, we set up this clergy abuse hotline after we released a report back in August. We've received over 1,600 calls to that line.
I think I read a report about that. Maybe your office put something else about that.
They trust when they call us, we're going to take their complaints seriously.
Well, I'm delighted that the response is beginning to change and people fully understand how serious. If we can't protect our kids, what else? I mean, what's more important in a society than protecting your kids?
You said it right, Terry.
Yeah, well, let me go to something else.
Sure.
There have been proposals in the legislature to do something about the statute of limitations, where they've run out and people that you and others would investigate can't be prosecuted because of the statute. Where does all that, what do you think ought to happen there?
Well, let me set the table for you. We identified in the grand jury report 301 predator priests. Of those living, only 2 could be prosecuted. And by the way, they both are behind bars. The reason only 2 could be prosecuted is because we have weak laws in this Commonwealth. We say that we can only charge these individuals with these heinous crimes for a certain set period of time. 39 other states have actually done away with their statute of limitations. The grand jury said that we should do 4 things. 1, get rid of the criminal statute of limitations. Number 2, make it clear who's a mandated reporter. Number 3, say that these confidentiality agreements that the church used to silence victims didn't apply to conversations with law enforcement. And number 4, give the victims the opportunity to confront their abusers in court by opening up really a 2-year window for them to go to court.
I mean, we're going to run to a break. There's a couple of other subjects, one in particular I want to get to, but it seems to me when you have charges, both sides have to be represented. The individual who's charged has to be fully and adequately represented, and the victims need to be full. And isn't that the sense of justice that we have to have in this country?
But Terry, every step of the way, the church has fought us on that reform. 23 grand jurors voted unanimously for those recommendations. A judge approved the release. The Supreme Court of Pennsylvania approved the release with those 4 grand jury reforms. 170 plus members of the State House of Representatives voted for it. There are more than enough votes to pass it in the Senate. It's really just a question of whether the President pro tem chooses to bring it up for a vote. The people of Pennsylvania, I think, stand with survivors.
And
they get it.
And I do think there'll be enough pressure so ultimately something will pass. All right. How about this? Putting people over powerful energy companies. You have to stay around if you want to hear the Attorney General on that.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
Well, just a light moment before we get on to a serious thing. You were a state lawmaker, a legislator, you were a commissioner. How do you adjust to being called general? I mean, we can have a light moment. There's nothing wrong with that.
I don't make people call me general, other than my 4 kids. Nobody has to call me general.
We know they don't call you that.
I prefer to keep it real.
All right, here we go. You wrote a op-ed, and here's what you've said. These giant companies have been hurting landowners for years, and here's the one. Specifically, the energy companies charge landowners for processing and transporting oil and gas to avoid paying landowners what they were due. Why should the people of the state of Pennsylvania care about this? Come on.
You know why? Because this is an example, and it's happening in northeastern Pennsylvania, predominantly a little bit in southwestern Pennsylvania, where powerful institutions are hurting the little guy. And the system is rigged to support those big corporations. And what's happening is wrong. These corporations are ripping off landowners. Here's what happens. The big drilling companies, Chesapeake and Anadarko, they go to the landowners and they say, we want to drill in your backyard for natural gas. Landowners say, sure. They sign a contract, and in exchange for allowing them to drill on their land, they get paid what's called a royalty.
Well, they should be paid for it.
And they should be paid for it, exactly. But what's happened over time is these big companies, these big corporate giants, they are taking what's called deductions out of those royalty payments. And not only leaving landowners with nothing, they're telling the landowners, because of all the deductions, you owe us money. That is outrageous.
What's a deduction?
It's another example of how big corporations get their way over good, hard-working Pennsylvanians.
What's a deduction in this case?
So they'll come up with some nonsense about how, oh, well, in processing the gas and moving the gas and doing this, that, the other thing with the gas, it cost us, the company, money, so there's less for us to pay you, the landowner. Well, here's the deal. In their contract with the landowner, they didn't say anything about taking out deductions. And so the problem is, in these communities, that oftentimes, and Terry, you've visited these communities, they're oftentimes forgotten by government.
You know, you're right about
these
that.
people didn't have anybody to turn to, and they turned to us, the Attorney General's office. I was up in Towanda, Pennsylvania, northeastern Pennsylvania, having a town hall meeting the other night with the folks who were being harmed, and I gave them my word. We're going to get them their money from these drilling companies.
Where does it stand now? Have you gone to court?
Oh, so I went to the companies. I said, pay these good Pennsylvanians what they're supposed to get.
There's an or in there,
and you know
right?
what? We ended up having to go to court. And we went to Common Pleas Court, which is the first level court. And guess what? We won. And then they appealed to Commonwealth Court, which is the next level up. And guess what? We won again.
And
now they're appealing to the Supreme Court, where you never know what a court will do, but I'd rather be us than them. At the end of the day, what I'm trying to do is stop a system from being rigged against regular hard-working Pennsylvanians and make sure they get what they're due. And that is, look, Terry, that's why I ran for this office, because it is an office where you can be the one person every Pennsylvanian relies on to protect their interests and their rights. That's why I love doing this work. That's why my team loves doing it. And we're going to fight for these people in northeastern Pennsylvania.
All right, let's go to another subject. And I don't think it's so controversial anymore, but it's a huge issue that's come on the scene in the last couple of years, and that is student loan debt, regardless of the college, whether you're talking about public universities that, you know, the tuition and other room and board is less than the elite private schools, but yet it has emerged as a big issue. So how are you involved in this?
Well, first off, Pennsylvanians carry more, or the second most, depending upon how you count it, student loan debt in the entire country. And what makes matters worse is when a student loan company or a for-profit college ends up rigging the system to hurt them and add a penalty to them, if you will. And that's exactly what happened with Navient, a big student loan company. Some people may remember it as Sallie Mae, which is one of their former names. So here's what we allege in our lawsuit against Navient, that when loan holders came to them struggling to make payment or had some issue, basically Navient steered them into a payment plan that was not the right payment plan for them, and all told added $4 billion, that's billion dollars of added costs and interest to their loans. That's $4 billion on the backs of students that they should have never been forced to pay in the first place. We sued Navient, and they immediately turned around and tried to say that our lawsuit was without merit. They lost on that. And now we're going to keep grinding on to help students in Pennsylvania. Look,
now, the Pennsylvania operation for loans, and no, you're not talking about them, right? You're only talking about these companies.
I'm talking about Navient, a company which, by the way, is based in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. They service loans from all over the country. So our lawsuit is fighting not just for Pennsylvania students, but students all over the country. And I think you go out and you ask families, you go ask students, you know, what's the biggest thing holding you back? Look, for some it's the cost of health insurance. But for most of these young people, it's their student loans. And so think about this, Terry. It stops them from being entrepreneurial. It stops them.
Well, they have to spend, I mean, I spent my whole life in higher education, and so it's only been in the last couple of years that this whole question of student debt. I mean, back in the day, you had some debt, but it was nowhere near what it's ballooned into now, and it's become a huge. It's just not a state issue; it's a national issue. It's everywhere.
It's everywhere. It holds the students back. And I was going to say, by the way, Terry, it holds us back too, because we don't benefit from the innovative, approach that these young people are going to take to help our community. The widget that they're going to develop, the service that they're going to provide. We want them to be creative and innovative. And with all this student debt holding them down, it's not happening. And what I won't stand for is a company that comes along and acts in a predatory manner and ultimately adds, in this case, $4 billion on the backs of students. Not okay.
All right, look, I want to thank you for coming on. You're always welcome on this program. If you have breaking news, come on and deliver some breaking news here, but it's great to see you.
Thanks, Terry.
All right, talking about seeing you, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.